All right, Luke chapter 24. Since we're in Emmaus, let's read this story, beginning at verse 13. It says, "Now behold, two of them were traveling that same day, that is the day of the resurrection, to a village called Emmaus. And as we were at the gate, I don't know how many of you heard, but Gideon said that there's no doubt about it. We know that this is the village of Emmaus. Of course, things have been built on top of those things. And, this is a church that's wasn't there in that time, but this is the area of Emmaus. But at any rate, they were on the road to Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they talked together of all these things which had happened. And so it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Yeshua himself drew near and went with them. And he said to them, 'What kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are sad?' And then the one whose name was Cleopas answered and said to him, 'Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem? And have you not known the things which happened here in these days?' And he said to them, 'What things?'" I love that line. Yeah. I just love that. "What are you talking about?" So they said to him, "The things concerning Yeshua of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the 3rd day since these things happened. Yes, and certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us. And when they did not find his body, they came saying that they'd also seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." Bill's translation. Keeping in mind, these are two of his disciples. These are two people that have seen him. Two people that have heard him, walked with him perhaps. And they don't recognize him. And they were hoping that he was the Redeemer of Israel. Bill's translation, "This is what we thought was happening, but now since all these other things have happened and he was delivered up and crucified, now his body's missing, we're just not sure what's going on right now." They're scratching their heads. But how many times had he told them, Son of Man's going to be delivered up, he's going to be crucified, and he's going to rise again on the 3rd day? More than one time? More than one time. So I always like to make this point. How many of his disciples, not just the 12, but he had many disciples, but how many of them got it? How many of them really, really got it? In fact, we read not too many days ago in Matthew chapter 16, after Peter had made this confession that you are the Mashiach and the Son of the living God, and then just a few verses later, he's wanting to stop him from going to Jerusalem, and Yeshua had to rebuke him. How many people got it? Paul says, had the princes of this world known, they would have not crucified the Lord of glory. If they'd been able to figure it out, they would have tried to stop it. But if they had stopped it, if he's not crucified, then he's not buried. And if he's not buried, he's not resurrected. And if he's not resurrected, you and I are yet in our sin. So no one understood these things. It's very easy for us 2,000 years after the fact to see these things throughout the Scripture, but for whatever reason, the Father hid it from their eyes. And here they are, standing with him and don't recognize him. So after they say all this, he says in verse 25, "Foolish ones and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have written. Ought not the Messiah to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory?" And I could talk a long time on that. I'll just give you the highlight. There is this principle, and Yeshua acknowledges it here, that if you want to enter into the glory, then you've got to be willing to endure the suffering. Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 8. He said that the Spirit bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Messiah, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. There's a lot of people in the body that want to see the glory. Very few people who want to endure the suffering that is the prerequisite to the glory. And the Messiah is acknowledging that he himself, to enter into the glory, must suffer. And so he's chastising them because you believe what you want to believe from the prophets, but you don't believe all that the prophets have spoken. And so he goes on from there and begins at Moses and all the prophets. He expounded them in all the scriptures, the things concerning himself. So he begins at the Torah, and he goes to the prophets, who are the two witnesses on Mount of Transfiguration. Who was standing there with him? Moses, the Torah, if you will, and Elijah, the prophets. Because Moses and the prophets, the Torah and the prophets, there are your two witnesses right there. Now, let me go ahead and say this. I have a good friend. I've known him for many, 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 many years. He's on television. You've heard his name mentioned a few times. I don't want to mention it, Perry Stone, but anyway. Through the years, Perry and I have, we've agreed on a lot of things and we've disagreed on a lot of things. And one of the things that we disagree, and he always makes it a point, anytime he gets on a television program or gets at a conference, and if I happen to be there, he'll make the point of saying that, of all the things that Bill and I agree about, there's one thing we do disagree about, and that's the two witnesses. And we do, because he believes it's Enoch and Elijah, and maybe some of you do. I don't. No. I believe it's a Moses and it's an Elijah. Not necessarily the Moses, not necessarily the Elijah, but a Moses and an Elijah. And in part, it's based on what we read right here in Luke 24. Because what does Yeshua use to testify of himself? Moses and the prophets. Or Moses and Elijah, if we can put it that way. You understand? Yes. So then, at the end of days, there's going to be two witnesses. Mm-hmm. Right? And I'll suggest to you that it's a Moses, or let's put it this way, those who have the pedigree, those who, genealogically speaking, those who had the Torah, the natural branch. Mm-hmm. But then there's that other group of people. Remember, Eliyahu was a Tishbe. He was of the inhabitants of Gilead. He was of the Toshvim of Gilead. And I'll recommend to you again that is representative of the wild branch. But the two of them come together, and that constitutes Israel. Again, the emblem of Israel, we saw a nice one in the Knesset the other day. It's a menorah, and it's got the two olive branches on either side based on the vision in Zechariah chapter 4. And I believe that vision is echoing what we see hinted at here. That Israel, in the Father's eyes, is comprised of that natural branch, represented by Moses, but also that wild branch that's grafted in, represented by Elijah, and those two becoming one in Messiah. That is what constitutes Israel. And so there are those who have the lineage like Moses had. We know what tribe he came from. We know who his mom and dad was. He had the genealogical record, but he also had the Word. He had the Scriptures. And then there are those like Elijah, don't know really where they come from. They just kind of show up out of nowhere, but before you know it, they're standing before the Lord of the whole earth. And so Yeshua uses the Torah and the prophets as his two witnesses to testify of who he is and what he was to accomplish. So he goes on from there, and then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone on farther. But they constrained him, saying, "Abide with us, for it is evening, or it is toward evening, and the day is far spent." And he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed, and broke, and gave it to them. Now what day is this? It's the first day of the week, coming toward the end of the first day of the week. And what happened that morning? Or what happened? Well, that early that morning, the women went to the tomb. I'll get it out here in a minute. They went to the tomb, and the tomb was empty. So we're in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
So he went and he took bread. What kind of bread? He took matzah.
Yeah.
And broke it and blessed.
Beautiful.
And now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, he took the bread, he blessed and broke it and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, And they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us on the road, and while he opened the Scriptures to us? So it's interesting to me that all this while they're walking with him to this village, and he's going to act like he's going to go on, knowing what's going to happen. And they want him to stay, and he goes in and he breaks bread. He breaks matzah with him. And when he blessed it, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And he gave it to them. He had done the same thing just a few nights before. Interesting. But that's when their eyes were opened and they realized who he was.